What's going on, guys? This is SyfromtheChi, back to you again. And I wanted to show you guys, I talked about this before, I want to show you guys how to build a computer. I don't know how to build a computer, okay? So, I have my handy dandy, Mr. Inept Adept. Okay. And he's going to help us and show us detailed instructions on how to build a computer.
We're going to talk a little bit about how to install all these different pieces. Now, I have a lot of different extra pieces in here that you might not need, so it's a little bit more confusing than it absolutely has to be.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure that I gave you some good examples of everything that you might encounter if you were building a computer today in sort of a modern computer, because there's a couple of different pieces you might see.
Why you gotta make things confusing?
I'm very confusing, it's what I do. But mostly the difference is right now in the modern world, sort of what processor you want to pick and how it matches the motherboard. So a lot of people pick Intel. They use the 7i, the 5i for gaming, the i7, the i5 for gaming.
Right.
Some people, now that AMD is getting more cores, are picking AMD. So you got to make sure that your processor fits with your motherboard. There's some good websites for that. You can go to like www.pcpartpicker.com. We'll link that in the description. And you can just pick all your parts and it'll tell you automatically if you pick something that doesn't work together. So we're not sponsored by them, I just happen to like it. None of this is sponsored. This is my own personal computer.
Yes.
These are all things that I bought because I like them. What I have is the old Core i7 with the old X99 board. Nothing's really changed since this came out 4 or 5 years ago, so I'll be able to show you how.
And it's so
works.
small, you would think it would be a lot bigger than that.
Actually, this is more pieces than you would think. The old PCs used to have like lots of pins that would come out. These are now flat, and this piece here, this big metal piece here, is actually just a radiator. So like underneath that, there are tiny little chips, like these little black squares that you see. Underneath this, which is called the heat spreader, there is a tiny, tiny little chip, which is the actual CPU. It's about the size of that little green bit right there in the middle.
Okay.
That's where that chip is, the CPU.
Okay.
Now, every motherboard's a little bit different and the sockets are a little bit different, but you'll always see a triangle pointed in one direction, and that will always match a triangle that's printed on the CPU, right? So you get them open. This one happens to have these two little levers and then this little drawer that'll hold it down, right? And then you can put the CPU on the motherboard to make sure your triangle lines up, That means we put this in, right? You know, we got our nice processor lined in. We've got these little metal levers, right, that sort of hold the tray in place.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, you just put it in, put that down, sort of clips in like this, clips in like that. Okay, that holds the processor so it is not going anywhere. Now, you can pick whatever processor fits with this particular socket. Like in every 6 months they come out with a new socket, which is why I say you should use PC Part Picker. So like this could use a Core i7, you could use a Core i5, you could even use a Core i3 with this same motherboard. They're all the same, what's called socket.
Okay. Gotcha.
Now, I put the motherboard in. I put the CPU on the motherboard. This piece is the motherboard. And a lot of people right now would be talking about how you need to cool the processor, which I have here. I have this heatsink and I have this fan, but these take up a lot of space. So usually what I like to do at this point is install the RAM in the motherboard before I put that in, so I have space.
Might as well get it out the way.
I have space to work on the RAM. Now, a lot of people will suggest that you put the CPU, the cooler, and the RAM in before you put the computer into the case itself.
The case, right.
So that way you don't have to work in the case, your hand's not so cramped.
Yeah.
Also, if you build it on a piece of cardboard like this, you can actually power the computer on just sit on this cardboard. You don't have to put it in a case. So if you have new components, maybe something isn't working for you, instead of like getting it in and out of the case, You can either put some spacers on here so that it isolates, or you can like work on the board here. Every board has a couple of different features. I usually just work in the case itself, but some people have even bigger hands than me, I guess.
I don't know about that. Now let me see how big your hand is actually.
It was a little bit.
And I got big hands for a woman. That is ridiculous.
The only thing I got big ears too, so I don't listen.
All
that
right.
well.
So can you just give us a brief description on each piece that's right here in front of us?
Okay. Well, obviously, let's start with the processor because I started on that, and I kind of got ahead of myself. This is the processor. This is a Core i7. This is what does the actual thinking. When you trick a computer to think, that's what's doing the thinking. This is a motherboard. I have the Ace Rock X99 Tai Chi board. It was a pretty good gaming board when I got it a couple of years ago. Still does everything I need it to do. It has all these RAM slots. It has these PCIe slots here. On the back, these parts you can reach from the outside. So you can see here it has onboard Wi-Fi, it has onboard like Ethernets, lots of USB for whatever I need to be doing.
So what is the difference between this motherboard and something newer today?
So the differences between this motherboard today is usually what's called chipsets. You see how it says here X99? Well, if they get a newer motherboard, then this socket type will be updated for the newer processors, and this number will change. Like some of the newer motherboards have X299, X399, Z390, right? So this number is basically the chipset that drives the motherboard. And you'll see things like the heat sinks. Some people now, RGB is all the rage.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you buy a gaming motherboard, like it may have lighting on like this piece here, or there may be all kinds of lights that you can set up that you can control. Not a lot has changed. Like they still have all the power pins, they still have the same sort of adapters everywhere. They still have these little M2 card pieces. You still install everything the same exact way. It's just little differences between the processor and the chipset that drives the motherboard.
Okay, all right. So I didn't know if it was going to be more expensive or if there's a reason that people buy a newer motherboard.
Usually the most expensive part of an upgrade is the RAM, which is a great segue because now we can talk about the RAM. Okay. RAM comes in all shapes and colors. We got this big fancy red one, we got this silver one, we got this one that's kind of boring, right? But RAM underneath always looks like this.
Right, right.
Okay? The colors like this and the shapes like this, and even Corsair has like ones that light up along the top.
Yeah, I saw
and, yeah, you can get RGB
so
RAM.
cool.
They are very cool. But these are just heat spreaders. These are just decoration. All RAM looks like this underneath.
Looks like that.
In fact, this is a piece of RAM that I stripped the heat spreader off of here.
Right.
The important thing, and again, if you pick your parts, this is very easy, is which DDR you get, right? So originally, way back when, they would have like DDR1 RAM, and then they keep going up, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4. The most expensive part of a computer upgrade is usually if you have one version of DDR, then you have to get the newer version of DDR for your new computer.
And what is DDR?
Don't know.
Fancy.
It's the fancy magic smoke.
Okay.
So I feel like it's like dynamic something.
Yeah, because I was wondering why it would go up in numbers. You know, it has something to do with the RAM or.
So they create the standard based on like how the memory is accessed.
Right.
So the pins along the bottom will change more than anything else, and usually so that it'll get faster.
Gotcha.
Aside from like the DDR number, DDR 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll look right here on the part, it says so many megahertz, 2400 megahertz, right?
Okay.
That's my RAM speed.
And how do you know if it's like 16 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes?
Usually it'll say on the board as well. Usually that's one of the harder things to find. You'll see it on the box usually.
Yeah, on the box, yeah.
But on the sticks themselves, they don't always say. Like even these sticks here, like there's no stickering. I don't know the speeds, none of that. I happen to know that this is 3200 RAM because I bought it, but it doesn't say.
Okay.
So if you have mix and match RAM like this, it'll always operate at the lowest speed. So like if this is 32 and this is 24, everything runs at 24.
Yeah, for 24.
Now RAM speed doesn't matter that much. Like some people got to say, oh, for the best experience, it's really hard to find, especially out there if you're gaming, a game that'll throttle on RAM speed.
Okay, okay.
Usually that's not your problem.
It's not the problem.
Yeah, so that's RAM. And one of the biggest and first problems that comes in when you install is if the computer doesn't boot, it's almost always a RAM problem. You gotta push it in harder than you think that you might want.
I guess like a click.
It's a little scary. You gotta hear that click.
Yeah, I got you.
And a lot of times the RAM isn't seated properly and it isn't closed all the way in. And the computer won't start, and that's a very common
that'll be a headache.
Like you push the power buttons, the fans all spin.
Yeah.
Right? The fans will spin. If you got RGB, it'll light up, and then they all shut off, and you're just like,
oh, that's the.
There's no beep. There's no scream.
Make sure you press down, guys.
Push the RAM down. Okay.
All right.
So the next piece that we come to is our storage. You know, you install your operating system on this. You save your games on this. I got 3 different versions of hard drive here, and I'm gonna go from newest to oldest because, you know, the new is exciting. Everybody right now in gaming is using these. These are called M.2 memory modules, right? So this one happens to be the, what is this? The Samsung 970 EVO. I got the small one. It's 250 gigs. Again, this is my own money, so I'm not buying all the most expensive stuff. And that'll fit usually if you have these M2 boards, like right into the M2 board on the motherboard, right? But this is right there on the motherboard. There's no cables, there's no power, there's no wiring. It's the fastest, right? Because it doesn't have to go through cables or buses or all that kind of stuff. It just goes from the motherboard to the RAM, bam, 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 right? Okay. So this is the fastest. So usually people will install the operating system on the M2, right? Their computer will start, everything will run, they'll be able to switch between tabs and stuff, maybe like your browser, but it gets expensive to keep everything just on the M2 drive. Like at the time of the shooting, an M2 drive of like 1 terabyte can be like 150, 200 bucks. As opposed to some of these other drives might be a little cheaper.
Really? Okay.
You know, so usually you make your investments in your hard drive where you'll see the most returns. Everybody always launches the operating system, so they put the operating system on here. If you have one game you always play, like maybe you play Call of Duty, then you would put, maybe if you had space, you'd put that on this one because it would load up the fastest.
It will, okay.
You know, you almost never have frame rate drops. Like you're not going to see performance in the game degrade because your hard drive is slower. It's always going to be load times. Like when you double click on the icon, you're waiting for it to come up. That's your hard drive speed.
That's you know, that MT.
If you're playing a single player game and you're like running through a door and the game stops and you see the little load bar, that's your hard drive speed. The next one that a lot of people is very, very common to use is you have these PC SSD solid state drives. This one's Western Digital. I happen to like Western Digital. They never really let me down. This one's 500 gigs, so it's a little more than this, which is 250 gigs. Right. I used to have my operating system on this because this is not quite as fast, I find, as the M2. But it's still really fast. So
it's not really about how many gigs is on it, it's mostly about how fast it goes.
Yeah. So when they talk about the SSDs or the M2 drives, it's all about speed.
So I'm guessing, let's say if you play multiple games, let's say you do play multiple games,
sure.
One game it could be 80 gigs sometimes. But you play 5 games and this is only 250.
Yep.
So you will have to get something
different for your big old Steam library. Like you on Steam, you have like 100 games.
Yeah.
Like this probably isn't even big enough. This is only 500
That's what,
gigs,
you know? Right.
These are a little cheaper now, but they're almost, you don't see much difference going between the M2 and the SSDs. These people pick because they have the cleaner look on the motherboard. You don't have to run extra wires. I don't know if you see, I'll show you guys a shot of this. There's power and data, right? So you have to run extra cables for this. There's power that goes in this one and then data that goes in that one. And we'll show a shot of that. So you have to run extra cables to the motherboard about it, and sometimes it just looks a little messier.
Yeah.
This is
that big beast.
This is the old. This isn't even a dinosaur. When I first started building computers like 20 years ago, this was basically your only option. But the cables were a lot more complicated. Like you had big old like cables that would go in the back. Right now you got these nice little slim ports. They don't take up like the whole back half. It's just exactly the same as the SSD. You've got your power and your data. This is like a terabyte. And what people buy this for is just storage. So you take a lot of pictures, you work on a lot of videos, you put them on these. These are spinning discs, so there's actually like a plate in here that spins, and they're a lot slower than either of your SSDs.
And see, you know what? Mine is around the same size, but I have an external hard drive. And it's about the same size.
You can buy little things for storage. Like you can buy always backup, because any of these can fail. So if anything's important to you, make sure you have a backup, like on an external hard drive or something. Once we get through the processor, the motherboard, the RAM, the hard drives, now everybody talks about the next big thing, which is the graphics card.
The graphics. That's what we want in games, guys.
Now, I spent a little bit of money on my graphics card recently. I got myself a GeForce RTX 2080. So they all look the same. Like they're almost always going to be a big sort of like cool block. This is the Asus overclock edition of this card.
So cool. He got the 2080, y'all. He's just trying to show off.
She's got the 1080 Ti. I'm not gonna say I'm better than her.
Whatever.
But I'm better than her.
It's nice though.
Got that ray tracing. I'm not gonna go into the details of the difference between cards. The thing that people like, these are all the same. Almost. They almost always have this same port on the bottom. Sometimes they're a little longer, sometimes they're a little thicker. If you get like a card that isn't necessarily for gaming, like it can just be just as long as that port. And this is a 2.7 card, so it's like extra beefy. It's like really thick. You can get them down to like one slot and just as narrow as that card. They don't always have big old fans on them, but anybody playing games or watching this video probably, if you open your case, you're gonna see this big old guy right there, usually. Right in the motherboard like that. Yeah. They do have, you gotta note, their own power bits here, right? So you see these black bricks on the motherboard. So like this processor, this will run like the processor and the motherboard. This is like extra power for your processor, right? So you'll run power lines to these later, but you'll also run power lines directly to any graphics cards, because graphics cards are really thirsty. They're probably one of the most power intensive in your computer. And between just having enough RAM, like honestly, if you're running most games, like 12 gigs will let you run games. But if you have other stuff going on in the background, you're watching YouTube, you got a lot of tabs on your browser open, you can get more RAM. The thing that almost always throttles your frame rates, so like your game slowing down, is going to be your graphics card. So if you're going to spend money on the graphics card, the processor, then the RAM. Usually today in modern systems, you're not RAM bottlenecked, so that's not the thing slowing down your game.
Okay.
So that's all the sort of pieces that we have.
Okay.
There's a couple of support pieces. This is the cooler, so the processor itself, if you'll note, has this like heat spreader. It's not enough to keep the computer cold. So like if you put it on here and you turned on the computer, it'll burn. It'll like bake right through the motherboard. Like I've seen it happen where there's been a cooling failure and this just melts onto.
Oh man, that's cool.
And it's expensive and you can hear the screaming. Nothing quite makes the sound of a gamer.
Don't make this scream, guys.
Nothing, no, the owner screams. Nothing quite makes the sound of a PC enthusiast who just spent a couple $1,000 and let the magic smoke out. Like nothing makes that noise. So we have this big old radiator.
Gotcha.
And there's screw mounts here on the PC. So you will eventually clip these onto that, right? And then there's a fan that clips onto the radiator. So like when we get this installed, you put in the PC, then you put the radiator on.
Yeah.
Now, in order to make the heat transfer a little bit better, we have this stuff. Now this is thermal paste. It doesn't take much, little dab will do you. You just basically take this top off, you put like almost like a grain of rice on top of the processor, right? Okay. So you put in the processor, you put in like a little grain of rice, you put this on top of it,
right,
and that'll keep you cool.
Gotcha.
Now most people when they do the installation will put the processor, then the RAM in, then put the cooler on, because as you can see this is kind of big and bulky, and when this is sitting on there it's hard to reach your RAM.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. Now I got a couple of different power supplies here.
All right.
They come in different wattages. There's usually a number, right? And power ratings, right? So this is a gold plus. They go up to like better metals like titanium or whatever. That's power efficiency and power volume. So like all of your components use power. Okay. If you have like a small graphics card and a small processor, then you don't need 1,000 watts. Okay. You know. So this one is 1,000, and this one is 750. This is a little bit hot stuff on the table. There we go. This one's 750. Now this one's bronze, and this one's gold. So the bronze ones will create more heat. They're not as efficient. So like you get 800 watts out of the wall, and this will put 750 watts out, and it'll create more heat, right? And as it creates more heat, that means the fan runs harder, that means it's more noise. People, you know, they really hate on fans because they're noisy. You got your hand, like if you're streaming and you got your microphone going, you hear your fans.
And, and those fans get so loud.
Yeah, they get really loud really quick. There's a couple of other small differences. Like this is what's called a partially modular power supply. So that means that some of the most used power cords are always attached right here, okay? But if you need to attach other cables, you have that option. They're not always there.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
This one is a fully modular power supply, right? So nothing is always attached. If you need a particular cable, you plug it in and you use it.
So you can mount it at any time.
Anytime, yeah. If you get a second graphics card, like you want to run SLI, you plug in the power cord, you run it to the second, you're good to go. Yeah. Usually they'll come with a bag, and that bag will be just full of all kinds of like cables and just
man, look at you just got everything, y'all.
So that's all the parts, really. Okay. I've talked a lot. It's a lot more complicated than I've made it sound a lot more complicated than it really is. The hardest part, like I said, is just making sure you pick parts that work together.
Okay. So let's put this bad boy together.
Put it together.